those of you who know me know that I have had an interest in architecture and the built environment for most of my career in public history. And I've been able to use that information in a lot of different capacities, also, of course, primarily when I'm doing my walking tours. And this topic is something that I had an opportunity, I was given an opportunity to do a program in the fall for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, or OLLI, that's out there. And they were getting ready to do a field trip to Detroit. And so they asked me to do this. And so when Beth asked what was the next thing I wanted to talk about, I suggested this program. But the program that you're seeing here, like with a lot of my programs, is not the program that I did in the fall, because I enhanced it a little bit. I added a little more information, and I try to do that with all of my programs to see what more can I add. So, but also with all my programs, I like to say, keep in mind this is a work in progress. This is not the be-all or end-all to Art Deco. This is something that keeps growing. There are things that I added in the last few months, in fact, probably within the last few hours, as I was sitting at my desk today trying to, and yes, I don't want you to think that I have these things all prepared months ago. No, I'm still working on them up to like 5 o'clock, you know, trying to get things together. So it is a work in progress. There are definitely things that I can add, things that I want to learn about, and you'll find that as we go on with this evening. How one defines an Art Deco, I might have stretched it a little bit, and I have some very good friends in this audience that will certainly bring me back to, you know, they may not say anything to me this evening, but they may say something to me later. Yes, Pam, I'm looking at you, Pam. I'm looking at you, Pam. Pam O'Connor, somehow the two of us did something. I can't remember what it was. Oh, that's right, we authored a book, right? Yeah, okay, anyway. And I am collecting other, you know, different types of styles for this. I've been looking for, of course, residential, and I have a possibility of a house out on Douglas Avenue that I might want to see. So this program is emphasizing architecture, although we will see some interiors of these buildings. And with all these programs, as you know, I like to keep them interactive. So if you have any questions, especially towards the end of the program, I will be more than happy to try to answer them. And if not, there is quite a learned group of people in this room that can also assist me with that. All right, and hopefully this will work all right. So since January 1st, have you seen this come out a lot? Oh yeah, I've seen it in displays, I've seen it in discussions. They're talking about things happening now in the new Roaring 20s. Now, what does that mean in the end? I don't know. I don't know if the next year we're going to see a revival of F. Scott Fitzgerald, the Charleston, Flappers, or Prohibition. Time will tell. But if anything, it's a good time for us to look at Art Deco. Because when you think of the 1920s, one of the things you do think about is the design and the architecture that was out there. Now, Merriam-Webster's definition of Art Deco is as follows. A popular design style of the 1920s and 1930s, characterized especially by bold outlines, geometric and zigzag forms, and the use of new materials, such as plastic. It encompassed a lot. It encompassed whether it was architecture, fashion, jewelry, furniture, design. It encompassed a lot of different things. The question is, would you have used that term Art Deco in the 1920s and 1930s? No, you would not have. We have used it since probably around the mid-1960s, around 1968, and we used it as a result of this gentleman. This is Bevis Hillier, who is a British art critic and historian, and in 1968, he published a book that was called Art Deco of the 20s and 30s, and he introduced the term. So if you were trying to search for something in the newspapers from the 20s, and if you looked under Art Deco, more than likely you would not find anything. The other terms that we will be using too, we will use Art Moderne and Streamline Moderne, some of which may or may not been used at that time period. But what terms would have been contemporary at that time period for this? Well, a lot of different things. Functional, modernistic, modernesque, my pronunciation is horrible and I apologize for that, and just simply Moderne. So it was called something different than what it's called today. The time period, yes, we're looking at those years between World War I and World War II, so the 1920s and the 1930s. Now, if you want to be specific, when you look at books, they sort of classify them between Art Deco in the 1920s, Streamline Moderne in the 1930s. But is that hard and fast? No. Art Deco did not end, or Moderne, whatever you say, did not end on December 31st, 1929. And Streamline Moderne did not start on January 1st, 1930 at 12:01 in the morning. It wasn't that. They did overlap. Another terminology you hear when you talk about these buildings are also PWA Moderne. PWA standing for Public Works Administration, a New Deal program during the FDR administration. And so some of the buildings at least one specific building we're going to talk about could be classified as PW Moderne and may have been called that at that time period. But these days, it's sort of put under the umbrella of Art Deco. Not only, I should say, PWA, but also funding was received through other programs, including the Works Progress Administration, or the WPA. But you hear more of PWA rather than WPA, but whatever. So, what was one of the major influences? Because the one date you hear with Art Deco is 1925. Now, I took German in high school, and I did really poorly. I mean, I can't remember too much other than verbs and certain songs and things like that. So, and of course, I didn't take French. So I am not going to try to pronounce this, but let's look at the English definition of this. The International Exposition of Modern Design and Industrial Arts. In the end, what you call it, the 1925 Paris World's Fair. I can remember World's Fairs. Not that I ever went to one. I remember when my sister went to Canada around 1967 for the one in Montreal. You know, World's Fairs in the 19th and 20th centuries were huge, and the impact they had was just incredible for a lot of different things. Of course, the first one, you had the first major one, you had the Crystal Palace exhibition in 1855 during the Victorian age with Prince Albert. If you happen to watch season 3 of Victoria, you know, that was one of the key events that happened in that event. In the United States, the first big one we had was in Philadelphia in 1876, but the one that probably more people know more about is the Columbian Exposition in 1893 in Chicago. Expositions did a lot. It exposed you to what was going on in other countries and other businesses, but it also showed the latest in modern design, which is what happened in Paris in 1925. And so when you look at the photographs that are there, a lot of the buildings and the architecture and what was in there, it was said that it was going to show major themes in modernity, technology, luxury, and leisure. And so it really pushed this design out. And this was one of the forces that helped it. Because, I mean, not everybody can go to Paris in 1925 to see the exposition, but there would be ways through mass media and other ways to get it out for that. We had just come off something called Art Nouveau, which was another design feature that was popular between 1890 and 1910, which was very asymmetrical, floral, I love this word, curvilinear. And you would see this in design and decor and clothing and architecture. And I don't do this usually, but the two pictures on the top are pictures that I took when my husband, my daughter, and I were in Barcelona a number of years ago. Now, Gaudi, I don't know if you would consider him an Art Nouveau, but he's certainly decorated enough. I want you to say yes, Pam. I want you to shake your, yeah, no. This is what happens when you sit in the front row, you know? Okay, thank you. But when you think of Art Nouveau, you think a lot of what Gaudi did. And what we have up here are two, one of his large buildings, and Casa Mila. And then in the upper right-hand corner was inside another one of his buildings, Casa Bartlow. And so this was the style that was prevalent at that time. And so now they're turning to something that's totally, totally different from Art Nouveau. So what was the influence when you look at Art Deco? A lot of things that were happening at this time. I think that the Egyptian influence is very interesting, and it's tied into something that was happening in the 1920s. King Tut. King Tut's tomb being discovered between 1921 and 1922. That had a big impact on a lot of different things, of course, obviously in design, and specifically design with this style at this time. You can see Mayan and Aztec influences in this design. Also Native American, Cubism, we've got Picasso out here now, the impact that that was going to have. Also another one that I've been reading about is Japanese impact too. So you have a lot of sort of influences, factors that are sort of moving in working with this design. Characteristics, you've got them listed right there. When you think of Art Deco, you think of geometric, you think of vertical or horizontal, symmetrical. So sort of contrast with the Art Nouveau that's asymmetrical. Art Deco is going to be a little bit different there. Natural forms. We're going to see that a lot in some of the decorations on these buildings. And ornamentation. Now, different than what you saw at Art Nouveau. And not that, I've also then gone off on tangents to find information about some of the artists that did some of the decorations that you see on some of the buildings, and it is really interesting. Other things, simplicity, very linear. So not curvilinear like what you saw with Art Nouveau, but something a little more different. And the other thing that we're seeing too are the use of materials, and in some cases materials that probably had not been used for other things when you think of aluminum, and also when you think of plastic coming in. Of course, stainless steel, chrome, and glass. Limestone is used a lot in these buildings, but I don't think that that's really something new. Limestone was used before, but we'll see that with some of the buildings. When you look overall, yes, government and commercial buildings, we've got some fine examples of that here in Kalamazoo. Also, you would see examples of churches and schools, gas stations, radio stations, and other buildings, and residential, but not to the volume that you saw in the use of this for other things. When you looked at residential, this is an example of a photograph I found. This is actually in Pittsburgh. This is from a development called Swan Acres. Now, whether or not you want to refer to this as Art Deco or Streamline Moderne, a lot of times anything that's sort of like Streamline Moderne in some ways have been, again, put under that umbrella of Art Deco. So you will see it, which is interesting when you look at architecture, because at the same time that they're building these in the 20s and 30s, for the most part, people are living in these. So they're going through, you've got the four squares and the bungalows and the colonial revivals, and of course the Tudors that you saw. So here we've got the bungalows and the four squares. This is a stretch of colonials not far from, I'll be seeing those at 6 in the morning when I go on my walk. And of course the classic English Tudors. So this is what you're seeing people live in at this time, that are building this time, not Art Deco so much, but they're still out there. They're still out there. So the first World's Fair we have was in 1925. Well, another World's Fair that had an impact on this style was between 1932 and 1933 in Chicago. And I love World's Fairs. I just love them, just for a lot of different reasons. And this was one that my mother talked about going to. In fact, she was living in Chicago at the time with her grandparents, and even remembered at a young age. She must have been 8 years old and remembered going to the World's Fair. This one is where you really saw the Art Deco. It really embraced that style in a lot of the buildings, and this one is the General Motors building of that. So that World's Fair also had an impact, too, in promoting the style. Streamline Moderne, which is more as you get into the 30s and even into a little of the 40s, you can see it's a little bit different than Art Deco. Now we're getting more asymmetrical. We also see down below there the use of glass block, and we're going to see that in some structures. The thing you find with Streamline Moderne is, even though you see the earlier modern, Art Deco, whatever, the earlier ones with everyday objects, Streamline Moderne is where you also see the use of design in everyday objects. And these are just ones that I found. Here we have a toaster Don't quite know what that is. Almost looks like it should be lifting off into space or something. Here's a fan. Of course, we have a clock. And this right here, over on the right-hand side, is a paint compressor. Not a bad thing to, use in painting. But so the Streamline Moderne also went into the design of everyday objects too. And even gas stations. This is a gas station that existed in Kalamazoo. It was located on the northwest corner of South Rose and Kalamazoo Avenue. And it's Texaco. You can see what's the Sanawax building, or now the Park Trades building just down the road. So that gives you a little bit of perspective. So the train station would be over here on the other side of Rose Street. But it's this is a standard station. We also have some pictures of Texaco stations that have that sort of streamline curvature that you would see in Streamline Moderne. A third World's Fair. So you're looking at, think about 3 World's Fairs in just like 15 years. It's incredible. Another World's Fair that had an impact, especially on Streamline Moderne, was New York. And when you looked at the buildings there, totally different from what you saw in Chicago, and definitely totally different from what you saw in Paris. And you can see how they embraced the Streamline Moderne a little bit when you look at the shape of the buildings. Anyway, so World's Fairs. So, where can you find Art Deco and Streamline Moderne? Everywhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some examples before we dip into Kalamazoo to sort of show you where it was and the variety of buildings that are around there. Well, when you think of New York, I mean, there's 2 iconic buildings that are classified under Art Deco. You've got the Chrysler Building on the left-hand side, built in 1930, and of course the Empire State Building on the right-hand side, built in 1931. Los Angeles, 2 buildings that I wanted to picture. Our City Hall, right here on the left-hand side, that was built between 1926 and 1928. It was the only building allowed to rise above 150 feet. It had Egyptian, Italian, Spanish, and Italian Renaissance influences, and with their ornament and sculpture. This is one that I really became interested in. If any of you read the library book by Susan Orleans last year, and she focused on the Los Angeles Public Library, right here, the downtown. And this was built between 1922 and 1926. It was designed by Bertram Goodhue, traveled to Iran, Italy, and Egypt. Look at this. It's a 2-tiered tower with a pyramid roof and relief sculpture and murals. And the book centers on, it's really, as was described, a love story to library and librarians, but it dealt with a fire that happened in this building. Fascinating book. It was just really interesting. So Art Deco. San Francisco. Okay, I threw this one in because my daughter lives in San Francisco and we go to visit her, and one day I said, I want to go to Coit Tower. So we went to Coit Tower. Now, it's not so much Coit Tower that I think is Art Deco, but the interesting thing about Coit Tower are the murals that are inside of it that have been restored. And it's just really interesting. Well, the tower was built in 1933, but the WPA murals depicted California life. And it's what you would think of, very typical of New Deal type art that you would find in a lot of these buildings built at that time period. Plus, I got her to go up there, so, that was pretty great. She had not been up there before. When you think of Art Deco, you think of Miami. Miami, between 1934 and 1942, just the increasing number of hotels and apartment buildings that were built from the numbers of people that were going down to Miami for the winter. And you've got examples of Art Deco and Streamline Moderne, a lot of nautical nature, white stucco, painted themes that reflected the sea with palm trees and flamingos. They are the largest surviving group of modern buildings in the country. So when you think of that, you think of certainly Miami. Colorado. Now, my husband is here, and he remembers this building very, very well because it's the Boulder County Courthouse. It was built in 1934, and he remembers it. I'm sorry, David, I had to bring it up. I know, true story, where he lost his car, Yes, which your grandmother had given you. in a court case. I won't go into details. So when I told him I was going to put this in, he didn't quite understand why. But it's a great example of Art Deco.
I was my own lawyer in court.
Yes, I know, you were your own lawyer in court. We've been married for close to 39 years, so I did hear this many times. This is frustration of the thing about when you're your own lawyer, what happens, okay? I saw one comparison to this to an Egyptian pyramid. They compared it to that. But so you've got the style going everywhere and anywhere. Chicago, oh geez, I could do a whole program on Chicago, which I wouldn't because I'm not an expert at it, but there is a great book that is huge on just Art Deco in Chicago. But what I have pictured here is I've got the Board of Trade over here on the left-hand side, which was designed by Holabard and Root between 1929 and 1930. This is just the tip of the Union Carbide and Carbon building on North Michigan. Was built in 1929 by the Burnham brothers. And then down here we have another Holabird and Root, 333 North Michigan, and built in 1927. But then you've got Detroit. And when you think of what Detroit was like at this time, I mean, it's incredible. They were really the premier American city during these years in the early part of the 20th century. In 1904, auto production was only at about 20,000. By 1917, it was 1 million per year. 1904, it was 20,000, okay? All right, okay, Pam. 1914, it was 1 million. Of that million, Ford was like 700,000 cars. You look at Detroit, Hamtramck, and Highland Park, population in 1900 was 300,000. By 1920, it was 1 million. By 1930, it was 1.6 million. In 1927, Detroit was 139 square miles. In 1900, it was 23 square miles. So between 27 years, they went from 23 square miles to 139 miles. So the growth of this community, this city, in just a short time was just incredible. And the building was also incredible. The three individuals, when you look at, now there are many other individuals in Detroit that were involved with this, but some of the three prime individuals, Albert Kahn over here on the left-hand side. Albert Kahn he was born in Germany, came to the United States. He was involved with 3 different Detroit architectural firms. With his firm, he designed hospitals, government buildings, libraries, mansions, skyscrapers, and just about every automobile factory that you could think of at that time. Over here on the right-hand side, we have Wirt Rowland, who worked for a number of architectural firms in Detroit, including Albert Kahn, and also Smith, Hitchman, and Grillis. And you'll hear those names, especially when we get into Kalamazoo also. And then down here, this picture of this gentleman here is Corrado Joseph Parducci, who was an Italian-American sculptor who came to the United States at the age of 4. He was in New York. He graduated from high school and then was sponsored by Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, studied and apprenticed with the New York firm of Ritchie and Zari, who you also hear about this evening. And when he was 17 years old, he came to the attention of Albert Kahn and came to Detroit in 1924, only planning on staying for a few months, but spent his entire career here in Detroit. Opened up a studio and had numerous commissions across the United States, also of course, predominantly in Detroit, and also in Kalamazoo. And we've got some work of Parducci in Kalamazoo. As far as Detroit buildings, you've got 3 major buildings, now more than 3. You've got a lot. In fact, I have a book that I acquired when I did this talk just on Art Deco in Detroit. You've got the Fisher Building over here on the left-hand side on Grand Avenue, designed by Albert Kahn on Grand Avenue. It's a 26-story tower with 2 11-story wings, 40 different varieties of marble. And here you could really see the vertical emphasis up. The brown one down here is the Penobscot Building. This one was designed in 1928 by Wirt Rowland at Smith, Hinchman, and Grillis, that gentleman we saw previously in the upper right-hand corner. Until 1977, it was the highest building in Detroit. It had 47 stories made of Indiana limestone, and it was decorated with a lot of Native American figures and motifs done by Parducci. And then the red one here was another one done by Wirt Rowland, and it was the Guardian Building, 1929. Had arts and crafts tiles, also decorated, more than likely. I think that was the pottery done by Mary Chase Stratton. So it's got that in there, and along with Parducci figures that are pre-Columbian and Mayan with this building. So a lot of other Art Deco buildings in Detroit. Here's some other examples of some of the Art Deco buildings in Detroit. Over here, we've got the WJR transmitter station. Even something like a transmitter station. This was built in 1934 on Riverview, and it's got the zigzag ornament that you see sometimes with Art Deco. And then over here, this one is the WWJ transmitter station on 8 Mile, built in the 1930s. Left-hand side, this church is classified as Art Deco. This is the Church of the Little Flower. That is in Royal Oak at Woodward and 12th Street and was the home of Father Charles Coughlin, the radio priest. And it's said that he broadcast his radio show in that tower. It had, Henry McGill was the architect, but it has Parducci features throughout the building. And then the last one over here, if you go to Belle Isle, you can see the William Livingston Lighthouse. 1929, it was done by Albert Kahn's firm, and it was the only Art Deco lighthouse in the United States. So just a few of what you would see in Detroit. Well, let's get a tiny bit closer to home. What about Grand Rapids? 2 buildings that I'm including in this. The Civic Auditorium. Now, I remember this well because I used to usher there in my youth. It was built, it's now the George Welsh Civic Auditorium, although there's very little that's left of it right now. It was built in 1933 as a cultural, civic, and convention center. The Smith, Hinchman, and Grillis, the firm in Detroit, was the major architect, but the local architectural firm was Robinson and Campaw. In Kalamazoo, they designed the old YWCA on South Rose Street and also Kalamazoo Central High School. The great majority of it. And this was, they had a $1.5 million voter approval, plus they got money from the PWA. So this you could classify as PWA Moderne. Very horizontal, smooth stone, had giant piers to support the portico, and it was a city relief project. It had a 500-seat auditorium. When you look at it, it's got some interesting carvings. It's got the seashell motif up here that's done by Parducci. And it's got figures. You can't see it because I've got not a very good camera. I try to get my best. But there are figures up here at the top here that were also done by Parducci. And there's figures of sports, industry, art, science, commerce, the signs of the zodiac, and the city and state seals. This was also done by Corrado Parducci. The only thing that remains of this building is the entrance and the lobby. The DeVos Center is part of this, so they've taken down the majority of it, including the auditorium that I used to usher people in. But that's okay. So that's what's left. So you can still walk in and see was it the black and silver room? The area in there, so the Civic. Now these are not the only Art Deco buildings in Grand Rapids, okay, but these are the only 2 that I took pictures of. Another place that I spent a lot of time with, this is the Grand Rapids Public Museum, which is not the Grand Rapids Public Museum now. This is located on Jefferson Street. This was built in 1940. Again, it was another example of PW Moderne. This is actually the site now of the Public Museum School for the Grand Rapids Public Schools. So it's on Jefferson. It's not far from what used to be St. Mary's Hospital. And this, now one of the things this has, it's got buff limestone, it's got black granite, and it's got those glass block windows right there at the top. And there's the black and the entrance there, and there's more glass in that area. And there I have a little more detail of the Public Museum. So Grand Rapids. Okay, so let's get to Kalamazoo. I've made you wait all this time to get to Kalamazoo. Okay. Before we delve into Art Deco in Kalamazoo, let's just briefly look at what Kalamazoo was like in the 1920s. In the 1920s, the population in 1920 was 48,487 people. That doesn't seem all that much, but it was an increase of 22%. It grew between 1910 and 1920, 22%. Between 1900 and 1910, our population grew 61%. So we were having a big population growth spurt. We were 8.5 square miles. Now, just to give you a comparison of where we are right now, our population today is about 74,000, and we are at about 25 square miles. So back in 1920, it was about 8.5 square miles. The economy was strong, great majority-wise, because of paper. And in fact, here you've got the Bryant paper mill right here. There were 14 mills across Kalamazoo and around the area, and during the 1920s, they produced 310 million pounds of paper annually. It certainly had a development on the area. For Bryant, it had a big impact on the development of neighborhoods like the Edison neighborhood, as far as the growth there. As far as residential, what we saw in the 1920s are people are beginning to move out of the central downtown area and up the hills before World War I and after World War I. And whether it was the Back to Nature or the Back to Hills movement. So you had a growth here. These houses were designed, some of these houses were designed by Ernest Batterson. This is Oakland Drive and Winchell. And if you're at that light, and if you're turning on to Winchell, those houses are still there. And this is Hillcrest, just off Oakland Drive. And this house does not look like that now. But anyway, so we're beginning to spread and move into other areas. Some increase between 1920 and 1930s as far as an increase in housing. Kalamazoo is 13%, but Kalamazoo Township is 26%. So people are actually then moving out of the city and into the township. Other types of residential at this time period, which may look familiar to some people, and that's apartments. Here's the Marlborough, built by Henry Vanderhorst, whose name will come up again. This was 1924, designed by Billingham and Cobb. With the growth in population, we were growing in schools and education. 1920, we had about 8,000 pupils, and it was because of the growing and people moving in other areas. By 1927, within just a 7-year time period, there were 8 new school buildings that were built for the Kalamazoo Public School District. So you've got Parkwood here, you've got Washington here, this is Lincoln, and here's Woodward over in the Stewart neighborhood. Quality of life, very quickly, there were some things that were really, really growing in a lot of different ways. Quality of life, what you've got here, you've got the growth of our hospitals. Here's Bronson right here. They added on to the building. This is on John Street. Added on to the building in the 1920s. Down below here we have Borges Hospital, which also was growing. The new Borges was built on Gull Road in 1917. Kalamazoo Public Library, about where we're standing right now on the corner of South and Rose Street. And in the 1920s, we had the Peck home was purchased for the Kalamazoo Public Museum next to the library, and then next to that, we also had the Coffer home that was bought for the art department and also for an early home of the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. Up here, we've got, again, quality of life. We've got the State Theater, 1927. The YWCA, this building was built between 1918 and 1921. Chenery Auditorium, which was built in 1924 within the walls of Central High School. This was also completed in the 1920s. And the Kalamazoo Symphony Orchestra, which next year will be celebrating its centennial. So a lot of stuff going on in the 1920s. Another thing that happened in 1929 was the city of Kalamazoo brought in a consultant named Jacob Crane. And one of the things that he recommended in his very extensive plan for the city of Kalamazoo was the creation of what he called a city center or civic center. And this was his drawing. You have Bronson Park here, but then you've got buildings that he had said, like here you have First Presbyterian Church. You can see the roof line of First Methodist. That really hasn't changed that much. That was completed around 1928, 29. But then he's got, this was his vision of the county building. We'll see how it differed in that way. But he talked about that before, but he talked about at that time, making the area around Bronson Park more of a civic center. Okay, getting into Art Deco, I know that this is technically not Art Deco, but it certainly has some similarities. If you look at this building, Kalamazoo Gazette, 1925, and it was designed by Albert Kahn. on the corner of South Burdick and West Lovell Street. The Gazette had been a part of this community since 1834 and had been located in a lot of different places, and by the 1920s was owned by George Booth, part of the Booth newspaper chain. And it was interesting, the buildings that were designed by Kahn for the various newspapers. Now, when you look at this one, I want you to pay particular attention to this red tile roof up above. We'll also talk about these figures here on the front of the building. It looks rather small because this is before they added on any of the additions that then subsequently came down for what is there now. I'm sort of going on just a tiny tangent, which won't take very long, but it was interesting that between 1906 and 1936, for over the next 30 years, Albert Kahn designed a number of buildings for newspapers that were in that Booth chain. So we've got the Grand Rapids Press right here. This was a classical building, 1906, came down about 60 years later. The Bay City Times building in Bay City was 1910. This is now housing in Bay City. Down here was the Saginaw News. This one was built around 1916. That came down about 40 years later. And this is the Detroit News building, 1917. So all done by Albert Kahn. Now these were 4 more that came up during that time period. Right here we have the Flint Journal, which was 1924. The Jackson City Patriot. Down here's the Muskegon Chronicle. Jackson City was built in 1927. Muskegon is 1928. And then we have Ann Arbor, which is 1936. So a lot of building that was going on in that 30-year time period. Classical, some I don't know if you can really classify as far as style, except this one. The Ann Arbor News building, which still exists, it's a home for the University of Michigan Credit Union, is really Art Deco. But it's interesting when I look at Muskegon, because when I look at the Muskegon building, if you look at the tile roof, it's very similar to what the Kalamazoo Gazette had on their building. And here we're back to this picture. So it is very linear like Art Deco, but it does have, it's probably not totally Art Deco. I wish I could say that it is, but it's not. But what's interesting when you look at the figures, because the figures that are done up here at the top and also in the middle were done by Ulysses Ritchie. So not Corrado Parducci, which is easy to assume, which I did until it was pointed out to me that I had seen an article a long time ago that was done by someone else. And Ritchie was an American sculptor. He was mainly in New Jersey and New York. And as I said, he was a partner in a firm, Ritchie and Zari. It's interesting that they did things for the World's Fair in San Francisco in 1915. And they also worked with Kahn when the Fisher Building, they did that, and some other buildings at the University of Michigan. So he was doing things in Michigan specifically. And in fact, Parducci had apprenticed with him, as I mentioned, before he went off on his own. So what we have here is we have 2 figures that reflect printing and journalism on this building. And one is holding a quill pen and a book to record time. Other has an hourglass to mark the passing of time and a scroll. And then throughout the side of it, they have printing press and other reliefs around, and they've got printer marks around here. So very similar to what you saw in the Muskegon Chronicle building. This is a really bad picture taken in June, so you really can't see it all that much. But one of the things when Bronson, who currently owns the building, got a hold of it, they did take off, there had been some reflected glass that went from the top to the bottom, and so the printing marks had been covered up, and they opened those up, which was really very, very nice. But you can see that they did the same thing in Muskegon. They had taken off the tile roof, and whether that was to make an extension up higher, I'm not really too sure. And here's the Muskegon Chronicle building, which is now part of the Muskegon Community College, and they've got that same sort of repetition. Now, I don't have any information that these were also done by Ulysses Ritchie, but I am assuming that it might have been, because the style is just very similar to what we had in Kalamazoo. And here's another picture of the one in Kalamazoo. And again, with some of the detail that you see around the middle with those printing marks. Okay, here we go. Now, some of these have been identified as Art Deco. Some of them have not yet. And so I guess what I'm doing is I'm just throwing some of these out to see what people think and if they can be considered Art Deco. Let's go with number 1, the Dewing Building. And if you want to say no later, that's fine. But I'm just throwing these out as possibilities, probably because I have no confirmation on whatever, if that made sense. So the Dewing Building, if you're not familiar with it, is on the corner of East Michigan, and this is the Kalamazoo Mall, or what used to be North Burdick Street. William S. Dewing was one of the principal owners of the Kalamazoo Stove Company. His father, William G. Dewing, had come here in the 1830s. And so Dewing also, William S. Dewing, both he and his father, had invested in a lot of companies through the years. And William S. Dewing decided that one of his investments was to build a building. And so they completed the Dewing Building in 1928. Previous to that, they replaced what was called Asbestos Row, which they called it that because the buildings were basically tar paper and asbestos, and they always said could have caught on fire without any, problem at all. So this is a little closer view, as you can see, of North Burdick right here. I have yet to find an architect for this building. Henry Vanderhorst was the builder of the building. And so now, how does one find an architect? How does one find a lot of this information? It's a little bit of a challenge because it's not just staring you at the face. You got to dig, and you got to dig. Whether you dig through the newspapers or, hopefully we'll have a time period. We've got a period of time when the newspaper is in a digital format that is really nice to use. But then we've got a period of time, like, for example, when this building was built, when if we want to, we can sit in front of microfilm and read it over and over and again, but that doesn't have any appeal to me at this point in time. So at one time, we may find the architect of this building, but has not happened yet. On all 4 corners, there's an interesting coincidence because all of those buildings were built by Henry Vanderhorst. And so what we have here, we have the Kalamazoo building, which was built in 1907. We've got the Hanselman building, which is 1913, which came down for the Kalamazoo Center. And then down here, we have the First National Bank building that was built in 1917 by Weary and Alford, designed by Weary and Alford. And those 3, plus the Dewing building, were all built by the same builder, which I think says a lot for his quality of work. And he did a lot of this for this. So let's look at the Dewing building. So now KVCC has been in it for the Center of New Media. They have been in this building since 2004. You've got the vertical nature of the building. You've got limestone. Pam's shaking her head, so this probably isn't a good example of it, but I thought I decided to throw it out anyway. She's my arbiter over here, among many other people. But I thought what was interesting about this building, too, of course, this has got the entrance over to the alley behind it. If you look above the doorway, then again, it's a building that's been changed a lot over the years. It's got W.S. Dewing building on it. Now, this may not be an Art Deco building, but I can tell you that the lettering over that seems to be Art Deco. Not that I would classify it as that, but it's still interesting. But like I said, some of these candidates I am just throwing out. Okay, let's go back here. This is Michigan Avenue. This is about 1936. We're looking east towards the intersection of Portage Street. And I'm sort of if I was taking this picture, I'd be sort of like standing near these cars. The Burdick Hotel is right here, which is where the Kalamazoo Center is. And I'm pointing my camera that way. But we know it's definitely post-1930 because of this building right here, the American National Bank building. We have in Kalamazoo 3 buildings to be designed by the Chicago architectural firm of Weary and Alford. I mentioned the first one, which is the First National Bank, which was very classical, 1917. Recently redone into housing and also retail down below. So this was 1917. But then we have this building, 15 stories. It was originally for the Bank of Kalamazoo, but because it was started in 1929 and finished in 1930, you know what happened in 1929. So the Bank of Kalamazoo did not exist when the building that was built for them was completed because of the Great Depression and the run on banks. But at that time, that's when the American National Bank formed. So we have a building made of limestone with carved geometric figures and quite an elaborate arched entryway. This currently is the third bank, but I always still call it the American National Bank. Of course, it helps that it's written above it in stone, so it's hard to ignore that. For that, here's a great picture of that entryway. And the thing about Art Deco, too, is just the decorative elements, for misusing this word over and over again, and I apologize for that, the decorative elements that you see on these buildings for, I always say, like commonplace things, like the display cases. This is great because the two display cases are there in this picture. They are not there now because if you walk down Michigan Avenue, which I do a lot on Fridays, one of them is now an ATM machine, and it looks nothing like this. But the light fixtures, when you go into the building, just the elevator and the ceiling and everything, and you can see a little bit of the decoration here. This picture is really interesting because you see this thing being suspended down the face of the building, and we talked to somebody who knew what that was. That was the petition by the local JCs to have Richard Nixon come to Kalamazoo in 1952. They succeeded, and he did. But again, you can see just that sheer size of the building. Now, these are two pictures. Sometimes we get pictures in a lot of different places. This was taken by Kalamazoo Civil Defense in 1952, and what they wanted to picture, they had spotters on the buildings that would go up there and look for invading Russian troops, or I should say invading Soviet troops or whatever would threaten the United States. And I don't mean to belittle them at all. I mean, this was a very serious thing at the time. But this picture is great because you get to see some of the detail up at the top. And you can even see it on the inside and the outside of this building. You can see some real close-up. I don't have as much information about this building. I'm hoping, we've got the Kalamazoo Gazette clipping files at the archives, and I don't know if there's anything in there. It's entirely possible it might be, even though the clippings come from 10 years later, there may be something in there. Because I don't have too much information at that time about the artisans that were involved with any of the sculpture of these buildings. One of the things that's interesting about it is if you go around, just around the corner of the building onto Exchange Place, you can have, the architects' names are there, which is the only building that I know of that the architects have literally put their name in the marble. So you can't miss that, Weary and Alford Company in 1929. They did not do that in the First National Bank building, and I have not found it in City Hall, so I don't think they did it there. And here again is the entrance with the lovely ATM machine on the right-hand side, if you haven't seen that yet. Now, these are not pictures that I have taken myself. These are wonderful things that called Google Images, because I've gone there with people who want to take pictures on the inside, and the security will say, no, you cannot do that. So these are going to have to suffice. I don't know how old these are at the time, but it still gives you a flavor. If you've ever walked into the lobby, you know what I mean, because so many times with Art Deco, you walk in and you're looking up. You're looking up with the emphasis on vertical. The interior was done by an artist who became really part of the Kalamazoo art community, Otto Stauffenberg. Came from Hamburg, Germany, was trained as an interior designer, and came to Chicago in 1925. And so he was commissioned to do the mural of the Bank of Kalamazoo building. It took 600 hours, 2 coats of paint, and he did it freehand. And if you've looked at it, it has a lot of that Mayan influence in it, a lot of geometric. It's really quite stunning. And even if you don't have any business in the bank, and if you're down there and if it's open, go on in. But I will forewarn you, don't, the security guard will be very, very nice and will offer you information on the history of the building and will hand you this sheet of paper. Don't believe everything you read. Because I didn't either, and I was right. And I don't have a copy with me, so I can't tell you. And whether or not they're actually giving it out anymore, I'm not really too sure. So, you go into that central area, and yes, your attention is drawn up like it happens in so many different Art Deco buildings. So Otto Stauffenberg. The building was recently sold It is now owned by the Hinman Company, and hopefully will continue to be a landmark in Kalamazoo for many years to come. All right. City Hall. Previous to this, our Village Hall and our City Hall had been on South Burdick Street. And they had actually, at one time, the city of Kalamazoo had actually reviewed the possibility of using the Lawrence and Chapin building on the corner of Water and North Rose Street, which the Vermeulen's Furniture Building had been there for a while. They actually looked at that in the 1890s as a city hall, but that really didn't go anywhere. In 1925, the city purchased a piece of property. There were two homes on it, two pieces of property, the Millam House and the Orchid House. The Millam House was on the corner of South and St. John Place, and then the Orchid House was over on the corner of Lovell and St. John Place. And then they for 7 years, they started putting the necessary funds away, starting around 1924, 1925. And it's been said that the only thing they went to the voters for was to whether or not they should construct a new building. And the voters said, yes, go ahead. So the city then turned to Weary and Alford, and it was built by O.F. Miller, now known as Miller Davis. It took 9 months, and so here's a drawing. Here we go, Weary and Alford, and here's the City Hall. Cost $524,000 to construct it. Was reinforced concrete building, decorated on the exterior with granite and limestone, and is just a perfect example of Art Deco. Now see, this is 1931, so remember how I said that those dates aren't really fast and firm that you've got to hold on to, because this really is identified as an Art Deco building. It always seems like this angle is the one to take it when you're standing in Bronson Park and you're looking at that corner of South and South John Street. But you know, it's incredible when you look at that building and also see so many of the details like the light fixtures and the flagpole. And when you go around the corner, you see some of the details on the south side of the building. You know, very geometric shaped, a lot of the characteristics that we talked about with Art Deco. Now here's the rear portion of the building. You can see a repetition of the lights. The railing that leads down to the garage down below, very, very decorative. You've got flutings that are carved into the giant pilasters, floral and geometric designs. You had aluminum frames on the recessed windows, especially when you look up here. And it was interesting, a number of years ago, there was somebody in the city who felt that those needed to be sandblasted because they felt that it needed to be really shiny. Until you mention a word, well, that they didn't quite understand, but I think they did after a while. It's called patina. That so much of this metal is designed to age like this and to color like this. And so then they didn't do that. Here is another, how you get down into the entrance of the south portion of the building. Here it is approximately today. Here again are more of the flutings in the giant pilasters. You can see some of the detail up here at the top and in the middle, and then some, I know that they sandblasted the railings, I can't remember if they sandblasted this part or not. They might have before it was stopped. You may have noticed that at the top of City Hall, they have these inscriptions, and these were done by the Studio of Architectural Sculpture. They were designed limestone relief scenes at the top of the building. The inscription committee had selected 12 local historical events which were carved at each of the corners, which you will see. And again, here's the detail. These were sandblasted, I didn't remember that. So you see the detail. Oh, let's go back. Oh boy, I'm going too far. All right. So here you see the light fixtures, and I mentioned the flagpoles, and the entranceways, the entrances. The lights, and here's the railings right there. Very, very decorative. Now, one of the things that they did, and in 1978, to make the south entrance barrier-free, they added a lift and a vestibule on the back. And in the 1990s, it was removed, and a more appropriate barrier-free entrance was installed. So you can see the entrance in this way. So they took off that thing that they put in the back, but and then brought it back to, at least you got to see it. Now the interior, I wish I could tell you that the interior looks like this. It does in some way, but there are other things that are in there now, like a security guard, if I'm not mistaken, with a desk. So you don't get the feeling that you used to get when you would walk into the lobby. And again, you look up and you see the clock and the light fixtures and the elevator and the mailbox and so many of the details in that building that are highly decorative. When you look at the railings up here, it's just a beautiful, beautiful Art Deco building. City Commission Chamber. Well, actually, when this building was first built, it was also the courtroom and the decorative walls. Now, this is a black and white photo we have in the collection. I did not go in there and try to take a picture with my camera or phone or whatever, but if you've been there, you know how, of course, the dais does not look like this, like what it looked like now, but the painting, the interior painting was done by Stauffenberg, again. He painted it in colors of peach, aqua, and gold. He later stayed in Kalamazoo, ended up staying in Kalamazoo, became an interior designer, and continued to paint for many, many years after that. So what is now the City Commission Chamber. There is not as many seats now as what there were back then. But even look at the grills right there, just incredible. Okay, so this one is another one of my mysteries. Not South Burdick Street is another one of my mysteries. This is a postcard done probably in the early 1940s. And so we're looking at here's South Street right here. So we're looking north down Burdick Street. And right around towards the end near Exchange Place, there's this building. So this one is another one of my mysteries that I'm trying to solve. And unfortunately, I was not able to solve it before this evening. I'm calling this right now 128 South Kalamazoo Mall. And I've looked at city directories and maps so far. And what I've been able to estimate at this point, and I've got to confirm it with other records, is that I'm thinking it was constructed around 1930 by comparing Sanborn fire insurance maps. And, you know, it's got detail up here at the top. It's now Cafe Casa. It's about 2 doors past Exchange Place. You can see a little bit more of the detail up here, just very, very simple. Got fluted areas here, in here. But I just really don't know. In 1930, when I think it was built, it was originally the home for Hirschfield's Clothing. So I'm going sort of on looking at the Hirschfields and seeing in some way they were involved with the construction of the building. I looked at this picture and I'm going, what in the heck is this? And I realized it's the Exchange Building. Not used to seeing that quite yet. You think I would be. But over the years, it held a clothing store, a shoe store, jewelry, and of course now it's a coffee shop, and there is an apartment on at least the 3rd floor. I don't know if it's the 2nd and 3rd floor, whatever. So this is still a mystery. Is it Art Deco? It sure looks it to me. But, you know, again, I'm open for discussion. All right, this is the Upjohn Administration Building, our Building 24, for those of you that remember when Upjohn would number all their buildings. And this one is located on Henrietta, which is now called John Street, and was built in 1934, designed by Albert Kahn. Now, Albert Kahn, does that name sound familiar? It should. At that point in time, he designed not only what would be the administration building, but also the research tower, which was Building 25, built between 1934 and 1935. And they were replacing buildings that the Upjohn Company had taken over that were really, really in bad shape, that really weren't designed with a pharmaceutical company in mind. This is an aerial picture. It's really great because at the archives we have, it's called the Pfizer collection, but it's mainly material from the Upjohn Company. And Pfizer didn't want it, and so the way we divided it up is the museum got the artifacts and we got the pictures and the other materials that relate to the company, scope and a lot of business records and different things like that, and including photographs. So here we've got Henrietta Street right here. This is the Rush McNair house right on the corner of Lovell and Henrietta. Bronson would be over here. So here you've got, again, the administration building, and then here's the research tower. Eventually, the two were connected later on. In fact, maybe that's the connection. Maybe it was earlier. I don't know. That is, and that was built originally? 26. That was 26? All right. Then you see some of the older factory buildings that Upjohn used during that time period. So, can we call this Art Deco? Pam has said to me that I can call portions of it Art Deco. But it's very linear. It's got sort of like black, I don't know if that's black granite. Is it black granite? Pam is currently working on a National Registry nomination for the building. The building is currently owned by Bronson Hospital. And so she knows this building very intimately. But what's really neat is all the interior photographs that are there of the building. Now, when I look at the curved furniture, that to me sort of bespoke, whatever. It sort of brings out Art Deco. Here's more of the lobby, waiting room area. So when I said interiors, this was maybe about it as far as interiors go, but they're great. I mean, when you look at the clock up here over the doorway, we've got a stairway here. Here are some offices, and here you can really see the circular light fixtures, or something which you would really think of from that time period. And this is a boardroom, which looks like any other boardroom, until you look at that light right there. So I wouldn't say the phone is Art Deco, but I would say that that light is around in there. The painting is William Harold Upjohn, who was the son of W.E. Upjohn, who died prematurely in his early 40s. Anyway, so that building. So here we have it right now. One of the things that Bronson did is, for those of you that have been around the building, know that they kept the Upjohn Company name at the top, which was nice. And here you have the entrance with the black granite and the aluminum and the light fixtures that I guess you could say is Art Deco-ish, but the administration building. So I think we have some buildings that, yes, are easily identified as Art Deco. I think there are others that sort of straddle it, but still I think could be taken into consideration. And here's another view of it. Okay, county courthouses. Kalamazoo, we've had 3. This one, all 3 of them have been on Courthouse Square. So you have the first county courthouse up here that was our county court from 1837 to 1884. And then down here in the lower right-hand side, we have the one that was here from 1885 to 1936. And it was at that time the clipping came in about plans for a 3rd county courthouse for a lot of different reasons. M.C.J. Billingham was the local architect. The major architects were Smith, Hincham, and Grillis from Detroit. And Billingham had done a lot in Kalamazoo. And he worked for several different firms and then eventually worked with Leslie Cobb. And by this time, he was back on his own. The original plan called for a cross-type building, but Billingham changed it more to a block type. One of the things he said, which I thought was just really great when you find these kinds of things. Remember, the City Hall was 1931. So across the park, you've got this new building being built, and it's 1936. Billingham said that he felt that the new county courthouse should harmonize with the municipal building. He said it must be a type of architecture far removed from anything that might be only a passing fancy. And I will tell you, he put passing fancy in capital letters. So he meant business here. So what style did they choose? Just like with the City Hall, they chose Art Deco. Well, we are really lucky at the archives because we have a whole bunch of pictures during the construction. I might add that this was a Public Works Administration project, plus they got public funding for it. And we have photographs at like every single stage of the construction. So we see here they're putting in the cornerstone. Here, this picture, if you can see it, it's really interesting because it's got detail of the decorative elements between the windows, and we'll see a little more description. We'll see a little more description of that there. Being a federal project like this, they were heavily, heavily documented. So that's why you'd have something like this. What we have here, we have a couple different things here. I want to point out the decorations that you see on the doors here. And we'll talk about some of these elements as they're laying this down. This is the only interior shot that I have in this packet of photographs. It's a huge packet. This does show the decorative ceiling. As far as where this was, really helps when you look at the dedication booklet. These pictures come from the dedication booklet, and so you can see the picture here that we saw, which is the main hallway. This was the probate courtroom. This was one of the 2 circuit courtrooms. You know, the furniture is nothing really major, Art Deco or anything else like that, but look at those light fixtures up there at the top and the decoration up there. So it was completed, as I said, in 1937, and you can call this PWA Moderne or Art Deco. It was ochre-toned Mankato stone. The exterior was decorated with a lot of different things. One of the things you have vertical windows, and you have metal details between those windows. It was said to represent all that is new in architectural beauty and efficiency. Here's the present picture of the county courthouse today with the Exchange building behind it. We're just not going to be able to get rid of that. It's interesting because Parducci did the figures in this building on the exterior. And, okay, so here's the detail between the windows. The county did not care about sandblasting these to make them clean and shiny. So that is the patina that has developed. But if you walk around the building, you'll see some of Parducci's work. And one of the things that Parducci did was he made allegorical figures of justice, law, vigilance on the north and south facades. And sometimes what you got to do is you got to walk around the building. Beyond, you have to get past the trees and physically walk around the exterior of the building close by to see some of these details. You can see them here on the corners of the building. One of the things, and let me just backtrack quickly, the other things that Parducci did was up here at the cornice. One of the things that you will see up there are these lion heads that are there. I should say stylized lion masks and swag ornament up there at the cornice. And it's up there, and that was also done by Parducci, by Corrado Parducci. Okay, so there you have some examples there. The other thing that no longer exists were the bronze grills that were in the doors. These door panels were cutout designs that were given outline form by the light. The design was purely ornamental and had no significance in legend or history. So the doors, the exterior doors were composed of these panels interlocked together, and they represented industry, education, commerce, law, science, and agriculture. When I saw this one, I thought, oh, sure, she's holding a checker. But she's not. She's just holding a car. What happened, and see, here's a picture of what those doors look like. So you can see how many panels were in each door. So yeah, they were heavy, to say the least, but they were solid. In 1979, well, it wasn't 79, it was 1979, I worked at the museum. Wow, that was a long time ago. And the director at the time got a call from somebody who knew what was going on, who told her that the county had decided to remove them and they were sent to the scrapyard. And so I don't know how many of them were retrieved, but these two are actually 2 of them that the director retrieved and are in the collection of the Kalamazoo Valley Museum. So there's at least 2. I mean, I don't know how many all there were. And they said that one of the reasons they had to do that was because of the weight of the doors. But I wish that they had not scrapped them, because there would have been places for them to go where they could have been saved like what the museum has. But fortunately, we've got 2 here, at least. So as far as the courthouse, this one is going to be interesting to see. And why do I say that? The future of the courthouse. I'm sure that many of you are familiar that the courthouse was sold by the county commission to Plaza Corp. Currently, right now, I think the county has maybe 3 years left to go. It was like a 5-year lease or contract or whatever. As far as what happens after that, I don't really know what Plaza Corp has in mind for this building. I don't know what plans they have. I keep asking Sharon Ferraro, the Historic Preservation Coordinator. I don't think she knows. And personally, I am interested in finding out what plans they have, because this piece of property has been public property since 1837. The other thing is that I don't know how this is going to impact things like, for example, artwork. This is Kirk Newman's DAV sculpture and what happens there. So I don't know yet what's going to happen, and I have yet to talk to I talked to one county commissioner, and I just got the shrug of shoulders. So, but stay tuned, because I am concerned about what might happen in that building. All right, Shakespeare Company. Shakespeare Company was founded in 1897 by William Shakespeare Jr. and made, as many of you might know, fishing reels and other types of sporting equipment. And by the 1940s, they had several buildings that composed their factory, Kalamazoo and Pitcher Street. And in 1939, they announced the construction of a new office building designed by Giffords and Vallate of Detroit. And here we have the clipping that was in, actually in the clipping files at that time in 1939. It was completed in 1940, one story. Previously, they had offices on 2 different floors of other buildings, but now they were able to consolidate their offices into one building. And you can really see the use of glass block on this one. This was only part of their complex. Now, only one of these buildings remain. If you remember, Shakespeare knew that there were other buildings that were part of this complex, but you've got this building and this building that's left of Shakespeare. We've got details of the glass block here. The entry was very simple, a simple stepped entrance up. Here is a side view of the building. And there's piers in the parking lot, and I guess you could say the new piers that were put in, whether or not they wanted to sort of replicate the Art Deco, I'm not sure, but these are some of the older ones there. So Shakespeare, completed in 1940. Okay, I know that I'm going a little bit further on this, but it's interesting that when they redid the mall a number of years ago, they also put these, and I know these have a name, I don't want to say, light features lanterns. That's a little more, I never would consider these called a lantern, but oh well. And so what they decided to do is they decided to pick up on the Art Deco in their own way, and so you see these throughout the Kalamazoo Mall, so Art Deco. The Federal Building. The Federal Building. The Federal Building is actually the Federal Post Office and Courthouse on West Michigan Avenue. Previously, this was our post office on the corner of South Burdick and South Street. And when you look at the people that were involved in the construction of that Federal Post Office and Courthouse, there were a lot of people, if you can read that. There was a supervising architect, but the architect that we also use is Rockwell Leroy, who at that time was with Leroy and Newlander, who was a local architect here. And the date that we have in here is 1938, but it was finished around 1940. So I don't have too much information about this building per se. Again, this is something that you could describe as PWA Moderne. You've got those flutings carved into the pilasters, very similar to City Hall. You've got recessed entryways, some decorative elements to it. You can see the railings here on the side. And the interesting thing that I saw here is when you looked at, even when you looked at the railings in the front, you could see just a little decoration in there. So the Federal Post Office and Courthouse. Well, this picture is interesting. This comes from the Kalamazoo Public Library website. This was taken by Mamie Austin, who was a photographer who worked for the library and took a whole bunch of pictures between 1936 and 1941. This is the railroad overpass at the intersection of East Michigan and Riverview and East Main Street. And according to the City of Kalamazoo annual report, it was constructed in 1937. They called it the grade separation at Michigan Central Railroad at East Michigan Avenue. The annual reports really have a lot of information about different projects that were going around in the city due to money that they received from either the PWA or the WPA. And so again, we would call this PWA Moderne, but I want you to look at those 2 piers on the side. It's got a little bit of that flavor of Art Deco than what what you would think of, little geometric shapes in there, and you know, I would assume 1937. It's probably not around anymore until you go by there, and yeah, it's still there. It's very dirty. And I got to tell you, my challenge on Thursday was to try to get a picture of this without getting seriously injured. If you have been in that intersection and you know how fast cars come, and I did find a nice place that I could set up and take a picture. So it's still there, and if you go under it, you can still see that detail. But over the years, the dirt, the pollution, the smoke has really discolored it. But it is still there. Now, here we're getting more into Streamline Moderne. Now, again, this is another one that I don't have a lot of information on. This is the Kalamazoo City bus lines. And this, again, is a Mamie Austin photograph. So it was taken between 36 and 41. And if you look at this picture, you can see that there's a lot of glass block on this curved end. Well, sure enough, the building's still there. It's on the corner of South Pitcher and Walnut. So the shape is still there, but certainly a lot of the detail is gone. So, you know, we can put that down as a potential possibility. Now, here's another example of Streamline Moderne. I don't have any historical photographs of this, but this is up at Ransom and Porter. This is the Hoover Supply Company. This was built much later, 1948. And it was interesting because in the description of this, in the Kalamazoo Gazette article, it talked about that this streamlines efficiency inside and out. It's modern industrial modernity, and of course a lot of glass block on the original things. And but you can still see that sort of curvature in the Streamline Moderne. Now, I know that the state hospital administration buildings and receiving hospitals are not either Art Deco or Streamline Moderne, but I wanted to throw them in just because they were built like around 38, 40, and hopefully we will get there this summer on one of our walking tours, and it's interesting because it is decorated with Corrado Parducci on it, so we can see some Parducci if I'm lucky and connect to the right people. Now, this is really later, but Paris Cleaners. The company began in 1902, but this branch was built in 1954. And, you know, people say the purple cleaners. Drive-through, of course, glass block, Streamline Moderne, possibly. Now, it is said that the Bell family could only manage the primer coat for the delivery truck, which was purple. So I don't know if that's where that came up too, but has rounded corners, and it's just interesting to have there. So you never know where you can find, you know, examples of this. Heck, when you're walking in Riverside Cemetery, you find an example of Art Deco. This is the family stone and the tombstone for Frederick and Bessie Sutherland. Frederick and his brother Louis had started the paper company called the Sanitary Carton Company that later became the Sutherland Paper Company that later merged with the Kalamazoo Vegetable Parchment Company to form KVP Sutherland, and also then Stuart Sutherland, as Nancy is pointing out to me. Got to get that right. And it's interesting when you look at the family stone, the handwriting, the writing there, it's very much of that block lettering that you would see in Art Deco, and the family stone is very vertical. When you look at the various headstones, at least with Frederick, again, the repetition of that rhythm there, and traditional Art Deco lettering. So all I can say is the search still goes on. So that's what I've got so far, and who knows, when I do this again, we might have more. You never know. So, thank you very, very much, and does anybody have any questions or comments?